Hello and welcome to Lunchtime Politics. I'm Kayode Okikiolu. On the news this hour, the center stage is set for the swearing-in of Senator Hope Uzodinma as the Imo State Governor. And this comes after the Supreme Court declared him the authentic winner of the March 2019 governorship election in Imo State. President Muhammadu Buhari, his vice, Professor Yemi Osinbajo, lead other top government functionaries to perform the traditional laying of wreath in honor and remembrance of Nigerian soldiers who laid their lives for the country during the Civil War era. And federal government declares Operation Amotekun an illegal entity as Ondo State Governor Olurotimi Akeredolu kicks, saying the office of the Attorney General is not the court of law. Welcome everyone to the program. President Muhammadu Buhari today joined other dignitaries in the celebration of the 2020 Armed Forces Remembrance Day. Well, the Armed Forces Remembrance Day is an annual event which holds in honor of the Nigerian Armed Forces with particular attention to fallen soldiers. Well, this year's event is significant in the history of Nigeria as it coincides with the 50th commemoration of the end of the Nigerian Civil War, and that was on January the 15th, 1970. Among the highlights of the day is a laying of the wreath by the President, his vice, the Speaker of the House, Chief Justice, service chiefs, among others. The memory of the fallen soldiers was honored with a 21-gun salute. President Muhammadu Buhari also, during the event, released the pigeons signifying peace to all parts of the country. Away from the nation's capital, all roads lead to the Imo State capital, that's Owerri, for the swearing-in of Senator Hope Uzodinma as the governor of Imo State. Now, this is coming after the Supreme Court's nullification of the election of Emeka Ihedioha and declared Senator Hope Uzodinma of the All Progressives Congress as a winner of the March 9th, 2019 governorship election. In a unanimous judgment delivered by Justice Kudirat Kekereekun, the seven-man panel of the court held that the Independent National Electoral Commission INEC wrongfully validated or invalidated this time around some of Senator Uzodinma's votes. The court also ordered that the certificate of return issued to Mr. Ihedioha be withdrawn and a fresh one issued to Uzodinma.
The legal fireworks over who is the authentic winner of the March 9, 2019 governorship election in Imo State was finally settled as the Supreme Court overturned the decision of the Election Petition Tribunal and the Court of Appeal, which had earlier affirmed the election of Mr. Emeka Ihedioha as the governor of Imo State. At the hearing of the appeal filed by Senator Hope Uzodinma challenging the election of Mr. Ihedioha, the appellant contended that votes from the 388 polling units were unlawfully excluded from his votes. He argued that the excluded votes would have made him the winner of the election, as the Independent National Electoral Commission wrongfully declared Mr. Ihedioha as the winner of the election. These arguments canvassed by his counsel, Mr. Damian Dodo, were however countered by Onyechi Ikpeazu, a lawyer to Mr. Ihedioha. Ikpeazu claimed that the said votes were invalid votes, and the result declared by the electoral umpire placed Senator Uzodinma as a distant fourth position. After listening to the arguments from all the parties, the Apex Court, in a unanimous judgment, berated the Independent National Electoral Commission for wrongfully excluding some votes from the scores of Senator Hope Uzodinma. While the lawyer to Senator Hope Uzodinma applauded the verdict of the court, the lawyer to Mr. Ihedioha declined comments.
The case was fought clearly on the pleadings, but the lower court and the tribunal misunderstood our case. They completely misunderstood our case and dismissed our case at the tribunal. The Court of Appeal also dismissed our appeal. But the Supreme Court with the Chief Justice of Nigeria sitting, the full panel of the Supreme Court has seen merit in our appeal. And today, our client is the new governor of Imo State.
The Apex Court has directed that Senator Hope Uzodinma be immediately sworn in as the governor of Imo State, having won the highest number of valid votes cast at the March 9, 2019 governorship election in Imo State.
So reactions continue to trail the Apex Court's verdict on the Imo State governorship appeal, sacking Governor Emeka Ihedioha and replacing him with Senator Hope Uzodinma. Well, the People's Democratic Party, that's the PDP, has expressed surprise over the judgment, and they have described it as a sad commentary on Nigeria's democratic order. In a statement, the National Publicity Secretary of the PDP, Mr. Kolawole Ologbadiyan, says the party finds it difficult to understand how Senator Uzodinma, who came fourth in the March 9, 2019 election, suddenly becomes the governor, according to the Apex Court's judgment. Well, on the other hand, the All Progressives Congress, that's the ABC, is ecstatic, as you would expect, over the Supreme Court's declaration of Senator Hope Uzodinma as the rightful winner of the 2019 Imo State governorship election. Well, the party's spokesman, Mr. Lanre Saonilu, in a statement insists the party never lost faith in the judiciary, and that's despite the Supreme Court's declaration that it had lost the election in Zamfara State and ruling it out of the race in River State. Now, while saluting Senator Uzodinma's victory, the APC spokesman says the party is confident that other, according to them, stolen mandates will be restored by the courts. So let's look into this further, and we're being joined by Mr. Sonny Awonuga, a lawyer, as we take a look at the legal perspective and, you know, what this means generally. Good afternoon, and thank you for joining us on the program.
Thank you for inviting me.
Now, we have seen various reactions. We just got the APC and the PDP. On social media, this issue is still trending, and I'm sure if you go across Nigeria and you meet people that are concerned, you hear conversations and debate around this. So let's add your opinion to it. What do you think about this?
Well, the judgment was perfectly in order. I think what a lot of people are missing before coming to any conclusion, they should look at the reasoning, or what we call the basis for the judgment. It was very straightforward. Now, the thing is whether the 388 units, the votes there, whether they were lawfully excluded or not. That's what the whole thing centered on. So there is no need to be sentimental about it. Now, the Court of First Instance, the High Court, in their own wisdom, they said no, the votes were lawfully rejected, that INEC did well by lawfully rejecting it, sorry. Likewise, the Court of Appeal toed the same line. But don't forget that the Apex Court is the last court. And when we say last, most of the people there, they are jurists who have seen and done it all. We expect a painstaking and thorough analysis of every appeal brought to them. And if you look at it, the judgment was unanimous. What are we saying? Fine, it is true that the person being declared the winner came fourth. But that was when the votes from 388 units were not put in place. But by the time the 388 units were decided by the Apex Court as being unlawfully excluded, it's just a game of numbers. Do the calculation. They don't have to be so pedestrian and start giving us, oh, it is this, it is that. This thing already in the briefs of the respective lawyers. They must have brought these things before the court so that by the time the court goes through it, the most important thing to determine was whether the votes from the 388 units, whether they were lawfully excluded or not. And the Supreme Court came to the conclusion that they were unlawfully excluded.
But don't you think it's also important to see those figures, especially so people can say, okay, fine, this is why this decision was reached?
Yes, don't forget that what we have is a summary of the judgment. By the time the judgment comes out in full, when it's in the form of even law reports, by the time it's there, the whole thing will be seen. If you look at the basis of the judgment, they mentioned it. I agree with you, the figures should be seen. But don't forget that even, for instance, during the presidential election, the Court of Appeal gave a judgment spanning into hundreds of pages. They had the time to do all that. But this is the same Supreme Court where the CJN confessed that the workload they have is very enormous and tedious. And another appeal is pending on Monday, that of Kano State, just like several others. So what they have to do at that point in time is, having come to unanimous verdict, the most important thing is at least a summary of the judgment at that point in time, and later on you'll be getting the entire verdict in itself.
You know, something else that came out from, the seven-man panel is that the panel held that the INEC wrongfully invalidated some of Senator Uzodinma's votes. And, it goes back to the electoral process itself. But then that's not all. You talked about the High Court. You talked about the Appeal Court. The fact that, from that period up to this point, we had anomaly, if I could say that. So what does that say about our electoral process? And then add to that the High Court and the Appeal Court rulings too.
No, you see, that is why in the system, from the High Court, you're allowed to appeal to the Court of Appeal. From the Court of Appeal, you're allowed to appeal to the Supreme Court. And I have to commend the governor-elect having exhausted his rights. Because the most important thing is, if you look at Section 179, what the judges have done is not anything novel. They were merely following the law. What does Section 179 say? That the person who is going to be declared the governor must have the lawful majority of votes cast at the election. He must also have scored at least 1/4 of the votes in at least 2/3 of the local governments there, which happened after a sort of recount. It becomes a recount, but don't forget that the Supreme Court will not manually do that. The briefs from the lawyers already showed that. So what they have merely done was to restore the integrity of the process. INEC, in its own wisdom, for whatever reasons, they had reasons for cancelling it. But by the time the lawyers brought these things before the judge, the most important thing is they are the ones to determine whether the votes were lawfully excluded or not. The High Court, I'll say regrettably, came to the conclusion that it was lawfully excluded. Likewise, the Court of Appeal. But the judge, you can see, it's a 7-man panel, not even one person dissenting. So that means these votes were unlawfully excluded. So, for instance, the lawyer, politician who was commenting and describing it as nonsense, I assume that as at that point in time, he had not got the details of the judgment. If he had seen that, this judgment came as a result of votes from 388 units, which had otherwise been excluded, now factored in. That was why the person who came forth, they are not a sorcerers. Theirs was just to ensure that the votes of the electorate did count. Because by unlawfully excluding those votes, what was simply done by the lawyers must have been, okay, if you look at this and you add it, acclaimed and matched the winner. And the judges agreed because these things, they were there presented before them. It wasn't voodoo, magic, or sorcery. Nothing.
Interesting. Now, this particular judgment has caused a lot of debate, in fact, division, let me just use that term, amongst people, parties and even lawyers. They are divided over this. And seeing that tendency, do you think there is a consolation, if I could say that? I mean, for the ones that are, in quote, on the losing side, I mean, how should they handle this? What should be their consolation right now?
I think the most important thing is that the law is a constant. The law must always take its course. Don't forget that the judges, they are sworn to deliver their oath of office says to deliver judgment without fear or favor. When that of Oyo State was pending, this same lawyer, politician, said, I have nothing against him. But we follow events. Let's see whether the judges will learn that they are going to do. They ignored him because they have no business in politics. The election in Oyo State was upheld not because he ran a commentary threatening them or anything, but because they followed the law. Theirs is just simply to follow the law. All these aside comments have nothing to do with them. That's regrettably part of the hazards of their office, but they can't do anything about it. So that obviously the most important point everyone should take home is this. The 388 units that were unlawfully excluded, by the time the votes were counted, that was elevated the fourth person, and he became the winner by default. It should have been anybody.
So now this is the first governor. I mean, so far, Mr. Hediowa is the first governor elected during the 2019 election to be so removed in this manner. Do you see any other upset coming up in the coming days?
We do not know. Like I said on this program, when I mentioned that they said it's an Herculean task for a petitioner to prove that in an election, maybe unlawful events or that there was no substantial compliance. But you can see these ones, they took the bull by the horns. They must have followed those events because this thing was like a guide. Like I said then, from the second most senior judge. They will have done their homework, checked all these things, and presented this thing before. Because like I said, it's always from the evidence before us. Maybe this thing would have gone the other way. If the same people had not presented this thing from 388 units, the judges are not magicians. They wouldn't have anything to base their decision on. But they found out that, both the High Court and the Court of Appeal, they were in error not to have admitted those votes. The votes were unlawfully excluded. And for you to be the governor, it talks about majority of lawful votes cast. So those votes, they were lawful and they were unlawfully excluded. That is why it was the duty of the courts to restore them. They had no business, whether it was APC, BBC, no. Theirs was just to interpret the law, and they did that. Regrettably, somebody always be on the losing side.
Definitely.
Just like in anything, there'll be a winner, there'll be a loser, and that's what we should learn to imbibe. When the thing was going well, on the other side, there was no complaint.
Okay.
Yes.
Mr. Oniga, I understand this is an ongoing conversation, but thank you for shedding some light and sharing your perspective on this. We've been speaking with Mr. Sonia Woniga. He's a legal practitioner.
Thank you for having me on the program.
You're welcome. Well, we'll go on a break now, and when we return, we'll discuss security. Remember the AGF statement concerning Operation Amotekun for the Southwest. That will form part of our discussion in a moment. Stay with us.